In the previous section, we created our first Xamarin application. And for that application, we used ShareProject to share code between the platforms. We also tested that application on the Android and the iOS emulators, as well as with Xamarin Live Player. Starting with this section, we're going to start working with projects that use PCLs to share code. This means that right now we won't be able to test these applications using the Xamarin Live Player, but this also means that we can return to the stable version of Visual Studio, and if you want, you can also return your Visual Studio for Mac to the stable channel. So let's start by creating the first Xamarin application in which we will be using PCL to share code. The way in which we are going to create this project is going to be identical to the one that we followed when we created the previous project. Just in this case, instead of selecting a share project, we're going to select PCL when prompted. I am here on Visual Studio 2017, this is the stable version, and I am going to select Create New Project. And remember that in this new project window, you have to identify Visual C#, go to Cross-Platform, select Cross-Platform App Xamarin, and name your application. In this case, we're going to name the application Travel Record Application or Travel Record App. This is going to be the application that we will build throughout the next sections in which we are going to be covering Xamarin Forms. So it's going to be a very complete application, as you could see at the beginning of the course. So let's go ahead and name this Travel Record and click OK. In here is where we are going to set things just a little bit different. We're still going to select the blank application. We're still going to select Xamarin Forms, but now we're going to select Portable Class Library as the code sharing strategy. And finally, click OK. Once the application is ready, you will find in the Solution Explorer that the structure of this project that is using a PCL is very similar to the one that uses shared projects. In this case, the shared project is now a portable class library. And this means that it is a little bit different. It still has that app and main page classes, but it also has some other folders that we're going to talk about later, but that mainly will allow us to add more packages into this project. Because remember, this project is going to be packaged into a DLL file that will later be referenced into the other two projects. The other two projects are identical to the ones that we saw when creating a project that uses a shared project. The only difference in here is the PCL itself, which is still the project where we're going to be coding most of the functionality, if not all of it. So let's go ahead and start by designing the first page. And we're still going to be using the main page to do that. The first page that we're going to design is the login page. And by designing this login page, we will learn a couple of things about XAML that we haven't learned yet. And we're going to start by using something that we already used before, so we can familiarize ourselves a little bit more with it. And that is the stack layout. Remember that in the previous lectures, we used the stack layout to be able to stack the elements one after the other. That is exactly the thing that we want here. If you imagine any login page that you've used, you usually see first a box for the username or the email address, then you see a box for the password, and then you see a button, stacked one after the other. And that is exactly what we're looking for in here. So let's navigate to the main page.xaml file. And the first thing that we need to do is get rid of this label because this time we're not going to be using it. And it's in here where we want to define that stack panel. Remember that to start defining any XAML element, we start with the opening angle bracket, and then we start typing the name of the element that we want to define. In this case, the stack layout. The way that we want to use the stack layout is going to be similar to the one that we did before. In the exact same way that we have the content page in here. We're going to define elements inside of the definition of the stack layout. So we need to close the definition like this. So we're going to have an opening tag and a closing tag. It's between these two tags where we're going to define the three elements that we're going to need. Now, before moving forward, I do want to make this stack layout vertically centered, just like we did in the previous application that we built. So I am going to set the vertical options to be centered. Now, notice what is happening here. Because we're now using a PCL, we now have something very useful that we didn't have before. And that is auto-completion right inside of XAML. Notice that as I start typing the name of one of the properties, I get auto-completion. So I can just click enter on my keyboard and now the vertical options property is filled out. What's even better is that I also have this list of values that I can assign to the vertical options property. In this case, I want to select the first one, which is center. And there is another great thing about BCL. The Visual Studio will allow us to autocomplete SAML code in ways that it didn't allow with a shared project. So let's now define the 3 elements that we're going to need. The first element that we need is an entry. This entry is going to allow the user to enter their email address. And we can just close the definition like this. For now, we'll just leave it as an empty definition. Right below this entry, we're going to define a second entry. And so this is the entry for the password. And finally, we're going to define a button. The button does need us to define one of its properties, which is the text property that we have used before. And we're going to assign the value to be login. And so we now have the basic definition for our application. But there is still something else that we have to do before testing it. And that is to get the event handler for the click of a button ready. And here we're also going to have autocompletion, but even in a better way than just autocompletion for the name of a property or the name of an element. In this case, when we start writing the name of the event, we do see it listed, and we can type enter or tab on our keyboards to see it completed. But notice that now Visual Studio allows for us to autocomplete the creation of the event handler. It's not just going to fill the name, it's going to do something more. So let's go ahead and select this new event handler option that we have and type enter on our keyboard. Notice that yes, the name of the event handler has been created, but something else happened. Notice that the C# file for the main page.saml was also opened. And if we open it, we see that it has created the event handler for us without us needing to write it down like we did before. So this is very cool, and it will allow for us to be much faster when creating event handlers. But there is something else that I do want to change before moving forward. And that is the name of the event, which right now doesn't say much. It just says that it responds to the click of a button, but we don't really know which button. I mean, we do know because we are the developers and right now we only have one button. But what happens when we have more and more buttons? It becomes more difficult to understand what each of the event handlers mean or what event are they really handling. So let me tell you about one thing that you can implement for this to not be a problem. So I'm going to delete that event handler and I'm going to return to SAML, and I'm also going to delete this line of code. And before creating the event handler, what I want to do is set the name for a button. And we can do that with x:name and setting this to something that makes sense to us, just like we mentioned before about naming conventions. In this case, this can be the login button. And so now that the button has a name, we can create the event handler. We can select the new event handler option, type enter or tab on our keyboard, and notice now that the event handler that is created contains the name of the button. And it was still created on the C# file that we have available. This way, even when we have more event handlers, we'll still know that this one in particular is handling a clicked event from the login button. So it's going to be easier for us to understand what functionality is happening from inside that bunch of code. Now that we have the main design for our login application, in the next lecture, we're going to test it out and identify a couple of things that we should change to improve the user experience along the entire page.